The sharp crack of a shotgun echoed across the dusty street of Oatman, Arizona, causing Lillian Winters to flinch as she pressed her trembling hand against her still flat stomach, tears streaming down her face as she stared at the locked door of her family home. It wasn't a shot aimed at her, just her father's warning to the air, making it clear that his 19-year-old daughter was no longer welcome under his roof. "Papa, please," Lillian begged, her voice breaking as the April evening air grew chilly against her skin. She wore only her day dress, having been given no time to gather her belongings. "I have nowhere to go." "You should have thought about that before you disgraced this family," her father's voice boomed from behind the heavy wooden door. "No daughter of mine carries a bastard child." Her mother's muffled sobs could be heard from inside, but Margaret Winters made no move to defy her husband. The year was 1885, and in a town like Oatman, reputation was everything. The Winters family had always been respected, her father the town banker, her mother active in the church. Now Lillian had ruined everything with her indiscretion. She hadn't told them who the father was. She couldn't bear to say that Thomas Parker, the mayor's son, had promised her marriage after their encounter behind the livery stable, only to leave town the very next week when news arrived of gold in the hills farther west. He'd left without a word, and 3 missed monthly cycles later, Lillian realized she was carrying his child. Night was falling fast, the western sky painted in brilliant oranges and purples. Lillian sank down onto the porch steps, her chest tight with panic. The desert nights grew cold, and she had no coat, no money, and nowhere to go in a town that would soon know her shame. "Looks like you could use some help, miss." The deep voice startled her. Lillian looked up to see a tall figure approaching through the gathering dusk. He wore a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt, dusty riding chaps, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. A cowboy, by the look of him, and a stranger. "I'm fine," she lied, hastily wiping away her tears. "Don't seem fine to me," the man said, stopping at the bottom of the porch steps. He pushed his hat back, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind, yet not old, perhaps 25 or so. His eyes were a striking blue against his tanned skin. "Name's Ethan Ryder. Just rode into town." "You should keep riding, Mr. Ryder," Lillian said bitterly. "Oatman isn't kind to those who break its rules." "And which rule did you break?" he asked softly. Lillian laughed without humor. "The one that says a woman isn't supposed to find herself in a family way without a husband." To her surprise, the cowboy didn't recoil in disgust or judgment. Instead, he simply nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's a hard spot to be in," he said. "Your folks locked you out, my father did. My mother just watched." Lillian shivered as the temperature continued to drop. Ethan Ryder glanced at the house behind her, then back to her face. "You got any other family, friends who might take you in?" "No one who'd risk my father's wrath. He's the banker here. Controls too many mortgages for anyone to cross him." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I'll be fine." "No, you won't," Ethan said matter-of-factly. "Not out here alone in your condition." Before Lillian could respond, he was climbing the steps. He examined the heavy padlock her father had placed on the door. "What are you doing?" she asked in alarm. "Something stupid, probably." He pulled a set of picks from his vest pocket and began working on the lock. "You can't break into my father's house," Lillian protested, though she made no move to stop him. "Not breaking in," Ethan corrected, his fingers working deftly. "Just retrieving your belongings." "Unless you'd prefer to face the desert night with nothing but the clothes on your back." The lock clicked open. Ethan pocketed his picks and turned to her. "Quick now. Get what you need. I'll wait here and keep watch." Lillian hesitated only a moment before slipping inside the darkened house. She moved silently, knowing her parents would be in the parlor at this hour. In her room, she grabbed her carpetbag and stuffed it with clothes, her mother's handmade quilt, the few dollars she'd saved, and a small framed photograph of her family from happier times. She tucked her hairbrush and a small bottle of lavender water inside, too, then took one last look at the room that had been hers since childhood. When she returned to the porch, Ethan was leaning against the railing, seemingly unconcerned, though his eyes scanned the street carefully. "Got everything?" he asked. "Everything important," she whispered, acutely aware that she was placing her trust in a complete stranger. Ethan nodded toward the end of the street. "I've got a room at the boarding house, but I can't stay there," Lillian interrupted. "Mrs. Gentry is the biggest gossip in town. By morning, everyone would know." "Wasn't offering that," Ethan said. "I've got my bedroll and a decent camp set up just outside town. You can have my room tonight, and tomorrow we'll figure something out." Lillian stared at him, trying to understand his motives. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Ethan shrugged, his expression unreadable in the gathering darkness. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be alone when the world turns its back on you." He reached for her carpetbag. "May I?" She surrendered it to him, and they walked together down the darkened street. Lillian felt eyes watching from behind curtained windows. By morning, word would spread that Lillian Winters had left with a strange cowboy after being cast out by her family. "I'm Lillian," she said finally, realizing she hadn't introduced herself. "Lillian Winters." "Pleased to meet you, Miss Winters," Ethan said, tipping his hat slightly. "Though I wish the circumstances were better." They reached the boarding house, a two-story building with a sagging porch. Ethan led her around to the back entrance. "Less eyes this way," he explained, guiding her up the narrow back stairs to a small room on the second floor. It was sparse, just a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chair, but to Lillian, it looked like sanctuary. "You'll be safe here tonight," Ethan said, placing her carpetbag on the floor. "Lock the door behind me. I'll return in the morning." "Wait," Lillian said as he turned to leave. "You still haven't told me why you're doing this." Ethan paused, his hand on the doorframe. "My sister was in a similar situation once," he said quietly. "Nobody helped her. I wasn't there when she needed me. I can't change that, but I can help you now." He tipped his hat again. "Rest well, Miss Winters." After he left, Lillian locked the door as instructed and sank onto the edge of the bed. Her hand drifted to her stomach again, to the tiny life growing inside her. For the first time since discovering her condition, she felt a small flicker of hope. Perhaps there was a way forward after all, though what that way might be, she couldn't yet imagine. Outside, Ethan Ryder made his way to his camp on the outskirts of town, his mind troubled. He hadn't planned on getting involved in someone else's problems when he rode into Oatman. He was just passing through, heading north to the cattle ranges of Colorado where a job waited. But something about Lillian Winters, her courage, her vulnerability had struck a chord in him. He built up his campfire and sat staring into the flames, remembering his sister Emma and how her life had ended in shame and desperation 6 years ago. He'd been riding with a cattle drive then, too far away to help when she needed him. By the time word reached him, it was too late. "Not this time," he murmured to the night. He didn't know how he would help Lillian Winters, but he knew he couldn't just ride away and leave her to face her troubles alone. The next morning, Lillian woke to sunlight streaming through the thin curtains of the boarding house room. For a moment, she was disoriented, then the memories of the previous evening came rushing back. Her father's anger, the locked door, and the mysterious cowboy who had helped her. She washed quickly at the basin, changed into a fresh dress, and repacked her carpetbag. Her stomach rumbled with hunger. She hadn't eaten since noon the previous day, but anxiety over her situation quickly dulled her appetite. What would she do now? Where could she go? A soft knock at the door startled her. "Miss Winters, it's Ethan Ryder." She opened the door to find the cowboy holding a small bundle wrapped in a cloth napkin. "Brought you some breakfast," he said, offering the package. "Nothing fancy, just some biscuits and jam from the cafe." "Thank you," Lillian said, genuinely touched by the thoughtfulness. She took the bundle and invited him in, though she left the door open for propriety's sake. Ethan stepped inside but remained standing near the door, hat in hand. "I've been thinking about your situation," he said as she unwrapped the biscuits. "Have you considered what you'll do next?" Lillian shook her head, taking a small bite of a biscuit. "I have an aunt in Santa Fe, but I've no money for train fare, and even if I did—" She trailed off, her hand unconsciously moving to her stomach again. "Would she take you in, your aunt? I don't know." "We haven't seen each other in years," Lillian sighed. "Even if she would, what kind of life would that be? An unwed mother dependent on charity." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I'm heading north," he said finally, "to Colorado. I've got a job waiting on a ranch outside of Denver. It's good country up there, growing fast, a place where a person could start fresh." Lillian stared at him, trying to understand what he was suggesting. "Are you offering to take me with you?" "I am." Ethan met her gaze steadily. "It's a long journey and it won't be easy, but you'd have a chance at a new life, away from the whispers and judgment." "Why would you do that for a stranger?" Lillian asked, bewildered by his offer. "I told you about my sister," Ethan said, his voice growing softer. "What I didn't say was that she was with child too, cast out by her family just like you. She didn't survive the winter." His jaw tightened with the memory. "I've wondered ever since what might have happened if someone had helped her." Lillian's heart ached for his loss. "I'm so sorry about your sister." Ethan nodded in acknowledgement. "So, what do you say, Miss Winters? Would you like to head north with me?" The proposition was shocking, improper, and potentially dangerous, traveling alone with a man she barely knew. Yet Lillian knew her options were limited. Stay in Oatman and face scorn and destitution, or take a chance on this cowboy's offer of escape. "People will talk," she said finally. "Let them," Ethan replied with a slight smile. "We'll be long gone. What would I do in Colorado? How would I support myself and my child? Denver's growing fast. There's work for those willing to do it. And—" he hesitated. "If you're worried about your reputation, we could let people think we're married, just until you get settled." Lillian considered his words carefully. It was a risky proposition, but what choice did she have? She thought of her father's anger, her mother's silent complicity, and the life that awaited her if she stayed in Oatman. "When would we leave?" she asked. "Today, if you're willing. The sooner we're out of town, the better." Lillian took a deep breath. "Yes," she said, surprising herself with her certainty. "I'll go with you." Ethan nodded, a look of relief crossing his face. "I'll make the preparations. Can you be ready by noon?" "I'm ready now," Lillian said, gesturing to her packed carpet bag. "Everything I own is in there." "You'll need something for the trail," Ethan said. "Riding clothes, a good hat, sturdy boots if you have them. It's a long way to Colorado and we'll be camping most nights." Lillian bit her lip. "I have a riding skirt, but nothing else suitable for travel. There's a general store in town. We'll get what you need before we leave." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "And you should wear this for appearance's sake." Lillian looked at the ring, then back at his face. "Is that—" "It was my mother's," Ethan explained. "I've kept it since she passed. Thought it might come in handy someday. If we're going to pretend to be married, we should be convincing." Hesitantly, Lillian took the ring and slipped it onto her finger. It was slightly too large but would serve its purpose. "Meet me at the livery stable at noon," Ethan said. "I'll have everything ready." After he left, Lillian sat on the edge of the bed, turning the gold band on her finger. 24 hours ago, she had been the respectable daughter of Oatman's banker. Now she was preparing to flee town with a cowboy she barely knew, posing as his wife. The situation seemed unreal, like something from one of the dime novels sold at the general store. Yet beneath her anxiety, there was also a flutter of something else, a sense of freedom, of possibility. Her life in Oatman had been one of rigid expectations and careful appearances. Perhaps this unexpected turn of events, though born of disgrace, might lead to something better. At precisely noon, Lillian arrived at the livery stable, her carpetbag in hand. She had changed into her riding skirt and her most sensible blouse, her hair neatly braided and pinned under her bonnet. She'd left a brief note for her mother, saying only that she was safe and heading west. Whether Margaret Winters would mourn her daughter's departure, Lillian couldn't guess. Ethan was waiting with 2 horses, his own sturdy bay gelding and a smaller, gentle-looking mare. He'd already loaded the necessary supplies: bedrolls, cooking gear, food staples, and other essentials for the journey. "This is Daisy," he said, introducing Lillian to the mare. "She's steady and sweet-tempered. She'll carry you safely." "She's beautiful," Lillian said, stroking the horse's velvety nose. "I got you these," Ethan added, handing her a package. Inside were a pair of riding boots, leather gloves, and a wide-brimmed hat better suited for the trail than her bonnet. "Thank you," she said, genuinely touched by his thoughtfulness. "I'll pay you back once I find work in Denver." "No need," Ethan said simply. "Consider it a wedding gift." There was a hint of humor in his eyes that made Lillian smile despite her nervousness. She changed into the boots, which fit surprisingly well, and replaced her bonnet with the new hat. Ethan helped her mount Daisy, then swung up onto his own horse. "Ready, Mrs. Ryder?" he asked quietly. The name sounded strange to her ears, but Lillian nodded. "Ready, Mr. Ryder." They rode out of Oatman just as the church bell struck 12, passing by the bank where her father worked. Lillian kept her head high but her eyes fixed forward, refusing to look back. She was leaving behind everything she had known, everyone she had loved. Yet as they crossed the town limits and the open land spread before them, she felt not despair but a curious sense of lightness. The Arizona territory stretched vast and wild around them, the April sun warm but not yet blazing as it would be in the summer months. Ethan led them north along a trail that paralleled the Colorado River, explaining that they would follow it for several days before turning northeast toward Colorado. "It'll be about 3 weeks to Denver, if the weather holds and we make good time," he told her as they rode. "We'll stop in settlements when we can for supplies, but most nights we'll be camping." Lillian nodded, already feeling the unaccustomed strain of riding in her muscles. "I haven't ridden much since I was a girl," she admitted. "I might slow us down." "We're not in any rush," Ethan assured her. "Better to pace yourself than to be too saddle-sore to ride tomorrow." They made camp that first night near a small stream, far enough from the main trail to avoid other travelers. Ethan efficiently set up a simple camp, building a small fire and preparing a modest meal of beans, bacon, and coffee. Lillian helped as best she could, though her knowledge of outdoor living was limited. As they sat by the fire eating their supper, Lillian studied her companion in the flickering light. Ethan Ryder remained something of a mystery, a cowboy with trail-hardened hands who nonetheless possessed lock-picking skills and an unexpected gentleness. "How did you learn to pick locks?" she asked suddenly. Ethan looked up from his plate, surprised by the question. "Misspent youth," he said with a slight smile. "My father was the sheriff in a small town in Texas. He kept a collection of locks and keys. I got curious." "And your father taught you?" "No," Ethan chuckled. "He caught me once and tanned my hide for it, said it wasn't a skill an honest man needed." "Yet here you are. using it to help a damsel in distress, Lillian observed. Sometimes dishonest skills serve honest purposes, Ethan replied. My father was a good man, but he saw the world in black and white. I've found there's a lot more gray out there. Lillian nodded, thinking of how quickly her own life had shifted from the clear path she had expected to this uncertain journey. Tell me about Colorado, she said. What's it like? Ethan's face brightened. Beautiful country. Mountains that'll take your breath away, forests of pine and aspen, valleys so green in the summer you'd think you were in paradise. Denver's growing fast, new buildings going up every day, people coming from all over. It's a place where a person can start fresh. Is that what you're doing? Starting fresh, a shadow crossed his face. In a way, I've been drifting since my sister died, taking jobs on ranches, moving on when the season ends. But this one's different. The man who owns the ranch, Mr. Sullivan, he offered me a permanent position as his foreman. Said he's getting too old to manage it all himself. That sounds like a good opportunity, Lillian said. It is, Ethan agreed. It's a chance to put down roots, maybe build something lasting. He hesitated, then added, Sullivan's a fair man. When I write to tell him I'm bringing a wife, he'll understand. There's a cabin on the property for the foreman. It's small, but it would be a roof over your head until you decide what you want to do. The implication that they would maintain their pretense even in Colorado took Lillian by surprise. You'd continue the charade, telling people I'm your wife only if you're comfortable with it, Ethan said quickly. But in your condition, it might be easier that way, at least at first. Denver's more forward-thinking than Oatman, but still. Lillian understood. Even in a growing city like Denver, an unmarried woman with a child would face challenges. And when the baby comes, what then? Ethan was quiet for a moment. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, he said finally. For now, let's just focus on getting to Colorado safely. That night, Lillian slept in a bedroll near the fire while Ethan kept watch from a respectful distance. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully. The ground was hard beneath her, the night sounds of the desert unfamiliar and sometimes alarming. Yet when she did drift off, her dreams were not of fear or regret, but of mountains she had never seen and possibilities she had never imagined. The days that followed fell into a pattern. They would rise with the sun, break camp, and ride until the heat of the day made travel difficult. Then they would rest in whatever shade they could find before continuing until dusk. Ethan was a patient teacher, showing Lillian how to care for her horse, how to read the terrain, how to make the most of their limited supplies. At first, they spoke little beyond the necessities of the journey. But as the miles passed beneath their horses' hooves, a tentative friendship began to form. Ethan shared stories of his life on the range, of cattle drives and cowboy camaraderie. Lillian spoke of her childhood in Oatman, of her love of books, of her dreams of seeing more of the world than just the Arizona territory. Carefully, they avoided the most painful topics, her pregnancy and the circumstances that had led to it, his sister's tragic end. Those wounds were still too fresh, too raw to expose to the harsh light of conversation. 5 days into their journey, they reached Needles, a small settlement on the Colorado River. It was the first town they'd encountered since leaving Oatman, and Lillian felt a mixture of relief and apprehension as they approached. Relief at the prospect of a real meal and perhaps a night in a proper bed. Apprehension at facing strangers who might question their story. Remember, Ethan said quietly as they rode into town, you're Lillian Ryder now. We've been married nearly a year. We're heading to Colorado to start a new life together. Lillian nodded, touching the gold band on her finger. I remember. They stopped at the town's small hotel where Ethan requested a room for myself and my wife. The proprietor, a heavy-set woman with sharp eyes, looked them over carefully. "Just passing through?" she asked as she handed over a key. "Yes, madam," Ethan replied easily. "On our way to Colorado. My wife's got family there." The lie came smoothly to his lips, and Lillian marveled at his composure. "Long journey for a young woman," the proprietor commented, her gaze lingering on Lillian. "Especially one in your condition." Lillian felt her cheeks flush. Was her pregnancy already showing, or was the woman simply perceptive? "My husband takes good care of me," she said, finding her voice. She reached for Ethan's hand and was relieved when he squeezed her fingers gently in response. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the dusty Main Street. Once they were alone, Lillian sank onto the edge of the bed, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of their situation. "She knew," she said softly, "about the baby." "Women often notice such things," Ethan replied, setting their bags down. "But she didn't seem suspicious of us, just concerned." Lillian nodded, but her mind was racing. How many more people would they encounter on their journey? How many times would they have to maintain this pretense? And what would happen when they reached Colorado? "I'll sleep on the floor," Ethan said, interrupting her thoughts. "You take the bed." "But people will talk if they find out," Lillian protested. "Let them," Ethan said simply. "I know the truth and you know the truth. That's what matters." His insistence on maintaining her comfort and dignity, even when no one was watching, touched Lillian deeply. She had agreed to this arrangement out of desperation, expecting at best a pragmatic alliance. She had not expected kindness or consideration, yet Ethan had shown her both in abundance. That evening, they ate dinner in the hotel's small dining room, maintaining their roles as husband and wife for the benefit of the other guests. Ethan kept the conversation light, speaking of their plans in Colorado, asking Lillian's opinion as if they had discussed these matters many times before. She followed his lead, finding it surprisingly easy to imagine the life he described. When they returned to their room, Ethan made a pallet on the floor while Lillian prepared for bed behind the privacy screen. The intimacy of the situation, a man and woman sharing a room, even without sharing a bed, was not lost on her. Yet there was no impropriety in Ethan's behavior, no hint that he expected anything beyond the arrangement they had agreed upon. As she lay in the darkness listening to his steady breathing, Lillian found herself wondering about the man who had so unexpectedly become her protector. What sort of life had he lived before their paths crossed? What dreams did he hold for his future? And how long would he continue this charade before the burden of her presence became too much to bear? The next morning, they left Needles behind, continuing their journey northward. The terrain began to change as they traveled, the desert giving way to more varied landscapes. They crossed into Nevada, then Utah, following trails that Ethan seemed to know by instinct. The days grew warmer as April turned to May, and Lillian's body began to show more visible signs of her pregnancy. 2 weeks into their journey, they made camp near a small lake surrounded by cottonwood trees. The setting was peaceful, the water reflecting the sunset in shades of gold and crimson. Lillian sat by the fire, mending a tear in one of her blouses, while Ethan prepared their evening meal. "How are you feeling?" he asked, glancing up from the pan where he was frying rabbit he had trapped earlier in the day. "Tired," Lillian admitted, "but good. The morning sickness has mostly passed." Ethan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "We're making good time. Should reach Denver in another week if the weather holds." Lillian's needle paused in its work. "I've been thinking about what happens when we get there," she said carefully. "About continuing this pretense." "And," Ethan prompted when she fell silent. "It doesn't seem fair to you," Lillian said. To be burdened with a wife who isn't really your wife and a child that isn't yours. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his attention seemingly focused on the cooking meat. "It's not a burden," he said finally. "You're not a burden, Lillian. But this arrangement, it can't last forever. Eventually, people will realize that you're not the father of my child. And then what? By then, you'll be established in Denver. You'll have a place to live, perhaps a job. You can say I abandoned you if you want, or that we agreed to part ways." Or, he hesitated, or perhaps by then it won't matter so much what people think. Lillian considered his words, her hands stilling in her lap. "Why are you really doing this, Ethan? And don't say it's just because of your sister. There's more to it than that." Ethan removed the pan from the fire and set it aside before answering. "When I saw you on that porch," he said slowly, "something just clicked. I can't explain it better than that. It was like I was meant to be there in that place at that time, to help you." He met her gaze across the fire. "I'm not a particularly religious man, Lillian, but I believe in following the path that feels right. And this does." His sincerity was unmistakable, and Lillian felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. Over the past 2 weeks, she had come to know Ethan Ryder as a man of few words but deep integrity. He never spoke of his good deeds. He simply did them without expectation of praise or reward. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." They ate their meal in companionable silence, watching as the stars appeared one by one in the darkening sky. Later, as Lillian lay in her bedroll, she found herself thinking not of the past she had left behind, but of the future that lay ahead. A future that, increasingly, she hoped might include the quiet cowboy who had come to her rescue on that fateful evening in Oatman. The final week of their journey brought new challenges. The terrain grew more rugged as they entered the foothills of the Rocky Mountains. Spring storms brought rain that turned the trails to mud, slowing their progress. And Lillian's advancing pregnancy made the long hours in the saddle increasingly uncomfortable. Yet through it all, Ethan remained steadfast. He found the easiest paths, made sure they stopped frequently for rest, and did everything in his power to ensure Lillian's comfort and safety. His concern was practical rather than smothering, and Lillian found herself growing to depend on his quiet strength. They were camped in a mountain meadow, just 2 days from Denver according to Ethan's estimation, when disaster struck. A sudden thunderstorm swept over the mountains, bringing lightning that spooked the horses. Despite Ethan's efforts to calm them, both animals broke free and bolted into the forest. "Stay here," Ethan told Lillian, grabbing his hat. "I'll find them." "Be careful," she called after him as he disappeared among the trees, the rain already soaking through his coat. Hours passed with no sign of his return. The storm intensified, then gradually moved on, leaving a cold, damp night in its wake. Lillian maintained the fire as best she could with their dwindling supply of dry wood, fighting down her growing anxiety. Ethan knew these mountains, she reminded herself. He was experienced in the wilderness. He would return. By midnight, the fire was little more than embers, and Lillian was shivering in her damp clothes. She wrapped herself in her bedroll, trying to stay warm, straining her ears for any sound of Ethan's approach. But there was only the drip of rainwater from the trees and the occasional hoot of an owl. When dawn broke, Lillian made a difficult decision. She couldn't stay at the camp indefinitely, hoping for Ethan's return. Their supplies were limited, and she had no way of knowing if he was injured or simply following the horses across difficult terrain. According to Ethan, the main trail to Denver was less than a mile east of their camp. If she could reach it, she might find help. Gathering what she could carry: a water skin, some food, a knife, and a small bag of money Ethan had entrusted to her. Lillian set off through the forest. The ground was slick with mud and fallen pine needles, making her progress slow and treacherous. Twice she slipped and fell, the second time twisting her ankle painfully. But she pushed on, determined to reach the trail. By midday, Lillian was exhausted, her injured ankle throbbing with every step. She had found no sign of the trail Ethan had described, and the forest seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. Had she gone the wrong way? Was she wandering deeper into the wilderness rather than toward civilization? She sank down onto a fallen log, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. The baby moved inside her, a fluttering reminder of her responsibility to stay strong. She couldn't give up. She would rest, then continue searching. It was as she sat there, gathering her strength, that Lillian heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching through the trees. Her heart leaped with hope. Had Ethan found the horses and tracked her from the camp? But when the rider appeared, it was a stranger, a tall man with graying hair and a weathered face, leading a pack mule behind his horse. He reined in sharply at the sight of her, his expression registering shock and then concern. "Madam," he called, dismounting quickly. "Are you all right?" I'm lost," Lillian admitted, her voice hoarse from thirst and exhaustion. "My husband and I were camped nearby when our horses bolted in the storm. He went after them but didn't return. I was trying to find the trail to Denver." The man approached cautiously, as if worried about frightening her. "I'm James Sullivan," he said. "I own a ranch about 10 miles from here. You're quite away from the Denver Trail, Madam." Sullivan. The name registered immediately. This was the man who had offered Ethan the foreman position, the reason they were journeying to Colorado in the first place. "You're Mr. Sullivan?" Lillian asked, hope surging through her. "Ethan Ryder was coming to work for you. I'm his wife, Lillian." Sullivan's face brightened with recognition. "Ethan Ryder, yes, I've been expecting him, but he didn't mention he was bringing a wife." His gaze took in her condition. "And in your state, too, you poor thing, out here alone." "We've been traveling from Arizona," Lillian explained, accepting his help to stand. "Ethan said we were close to Denver when the storm hit." "You are," Sullivan assured her, "but you were heading the wrong way. Come, my ranch isn't far. We'll get you settled, then organize a search party for your husband." He helped her onto his horse, then led the animal carefully through the forest, talking reassuringly as they went. Sullivan's ranch, when they reached it, proved to be a substantial operation, a large main house, several outbuildings, corrals full of horses, and vast pastures where cattle grazed. A woman about Sullivan's age, his wife, Martha, Lillian soon learned, hurried out to meet them, her face registering alarm at the sight of a pregnant woman on her husband's horse. "This is Lillian Ryder," Sullivan explained as he helped Lillian dismount. "Ethan Ryder's wife. They got separated during the storm last night. Ethan's the cowhand I hired from Texas, remember?" Martha Sullivan's surprise was evident, but she quickly masked it with concern. "You poor dear," she said, taking Lillian's arm. "Let's get you inside and dried off. James, send the boys out to look for Mr. Ryder right away." The next few hours passed in a blur for Lillian. Martha helped her bathe and change into dry clothes, fed her a hearty meal, and settled her in a comfortable guest room. A doctor was summoned from the nearby town to examine her ankle, merely sprained, not broken, and check on the baby, healthy and active, despite her ordeal. Through it all, Lillian maintained the fiction that she and Ethan were married, that they had been traveling together from Arizona to start their new life in Colorado. It wasn't until late that evening, as she lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to the ranch settling around her, that the enormity of her situation struck Lillian fully. She was alone again, dependent on the kindness of strangers. Ethan was missing, perhaps injured or worse. And she had committed to a lie that would be difficult to maintain without him. A soft knock at the door interrupted her worried thoughts. It was Martha Sullivan, bearing a cup of herbal tea. "I thought you might have trouble sleeping," the older woman said kindly, setting the tea on the bedside table. "This might help." She hesitated, then asked, "May I sit with you a while?" Lillian nodded gratefully. Despite Martha's kindness, there was something in her expression that suggested she had questions. "James has sent the best trackers we have to look for your husband," Martha assured her, settling into a chair near the bed. "If Ethan's out there, they'll find him." "Thank you," Lillian said, her voice catching on the words. "You and your husband have been so kind." Martha studied her face. "James was quite surprised to learn Ethan had married," she said carefully. "In his letters, he never mentioned a wife." Lillian's heart raced, but she kept her expression steady. "It was recent," she said. "We've known each other for some time, but the marriage was somewhat hasty." She placed a protective hand over her rounded stomach, letting Martha draw her own conclusions. The older woman nodded, seeming to accept this explanation. "Well, regardless of the circumstances, you're welcome here. The foreman's cabin needs some work, but it's a good, solid structure. It will make a fine home for you and Ethan and the little one when it arrives." Tears welled in Lillian's eyes at the woman's acceptance. "You're very kind," she whispered. Martha patted her hand. "Rest now. Things often look brighter in the morning." But morning brought no news of Ethan, nor did the day that followed. The search parties returned empty-handed, reporting no sign of him or the horses. Privately, some of the ranch hands suggested to Sullivan that Ethan might have abandoned his wife, having second thoughts about the responsibility of a family. Sullivan dismissed such talk firmly, insisting they continue the search. Lillian, meanwhile, found herself embraced by the Sullivan household. Martha took her under her wing, introducing her to the routines of ranch life and helping her prepare for the baby's arrival. The foreman's cabin was cleaned and furnished, though Lillian continued to stay in the main house while the search for Ethan continued. A week passed with no word. Then, as Lillian was helping Martha in the garden one morning, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. A group of riders was coming up the road to the ranch, and in their midst was a familiar figure. "Ethan!" Lillian cried, dropping her garden shears and hurrying toward the approaching group as fast as her condition would allow. He looked terrible, his clothes torn and dirty, his face scratched and sunburned, several days' worth of beard darkening his jaw. But he was alive. As he dismounted, Lillian could see that he was favoring his left leg, and there was a crude bandage around his right forearm. Their eyes met across the yard, and Ethan's expression shifted from exhaustion to profound relief. Without hesitation, he limped forward and gathered her into his arms, holding her as if he feared she might disappear. "You're safe," he murmured against her hair. "Thank God you're safe." Lillian clung to him, her earlier concerns about their pretense forgotten in the joy of his return. "I thought you were dead," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Takes more than a mountain storm to kill a Texas cowboy," Ethan said, attempting a smile despite his obvious pain. Sullivan approached then, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. "Welcome to the Circle S Ranch, Ryder. Your wife's been mighty worried about you." "I got thrown when the horses spooked," Ethan explained, still keeping one arm around Lillian. "Knocked myself out cold. By the time I came to, the horses were long gone and I was miles from camp. Been trying to find my way back ever since." "Well, you're here now," Sullivan said firmly. "That's what matters. Let's get you cleaned up and looked at by the doc, then you two can get properly settled in your cabin." Martha led them inside, where Ethan was given a chance to bathe and change into clean clothes borrowed from Sullivan. The doctor was summoned again, this time to treat Ethan's injuries, a sprained ankle similar to Lillian's, a deep cut on his arm that required stitches, and various minor scrapes and bruises. Through it all, Lillian stayed close by, her relief at his return overshadowing any awkwardness about their situation. It wasn't until that evening, when they were finally alone in the foreman's cabin that had been prepared for them, that the reality of their arrangement came back into focus. The cabin was small but comfortable, a main room with a stone fireplace, a tiny kitchen, and 2 small bedrooms. Martha had stocked the pantry with essentials and placed fresh flowers on the table, a welcoming touch that brought tears to Lillian's eyes. "It's lovely," she said softly as Ethan built a fire to ward off the evening chill. "The Sullivans have been so kind." "They're good people," Ethan agreed, his movements cautious due to his injuries. "Sullivan's one of the most respected ranchers in these parts. Fair to his men, honest in his dealings." Lillian nodded, then asked the question that had been on her mind since his return. "What do we do now, Ethan? Everyone here believes we're married. The Sullivans, the ranch hands, they all think this is real." Ethan straightened, wincing slightly at the movement. "I've been thinking about that," he said, turning to face her. "Maybe it could be." Lillian stared at him, not sure she understood. "Could be what? Real," Ethan said simply. He moved closer, his blue eyes intent on her face. "I know this started as a pretense, a way to protect your reputation. But these past weeks on the trail, getting to know you, seeing your courage, your determination." He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I care for you, Lillian, more than I expected to. More than I've cared for anyone in a long time." Lillian's heart pounded in her chest. "Ethan, you don't have to do this. You've already done so much. I'm not offering out of obligation," he interrupted gently. "I'm offering because I want to. Because I think we could build a good life together, here in Colorado, because I've come to care for you and for the child you're carrying." He took her hands in his. "I'm not asking for an answer now, just think about it, please." Tears welled in Lillian's eyes. In the short time she had known him, Ethan Ryder had shown her more kindness, more respect, more genuine care than any man she had ever known, certainly more than Thomas Parker, who had taken what he wanted and then abandoned her to face the consequences alone. "I will think about it," she promised, squeezing his hands. "But Ethan, you should know, the baby's father." She faltered, the shame of her situation still raw despite the distance they had traveled. "Doesn't matter," Ethan said firmly. "The past is the past. I'm interested in the future. Our future, if you want it to be." That night, Ethan slept in one of the small bedrooms while Lillian took the other. But as she lay awake listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the Colorado night, Lillian found her thoughts continually returning to his offer. Could their pretend marriage become a real one? Could the accident of their meeting in Oatman truly lead to a life together? The days that followed established a new rhythm. Ethan, despite his injuries, began his duties as foreman of the Circle S ranch. Lillian settled into the cabin, making it a home with small touches, curtains sewn from fabric Martha gave her, wildflowers in jars on the windowsills, a vegetable garden started behind the cabin. She helped Martha with household tasks at the main house, learning the routines of ranch life and making herself useful despite her advancing pregnancy. The Sullivans treated them like family, inviting them for Sunday dinners, offering advice about the harsh Colorado winters, including them in the small community that formed around the ranch. Lillian, who had feared judgment and ostracism after her experience in Oatman, found instead acceptance and friendship. And through it all, Ethan waited patiently for her answer to his proposal. He never pressed her, never made her feel that his kindness was contingent on her acceptance. He simply continued to show, through his actions, the kind of man he was: hardworking, honest, gentle in his strength. The baby's movements grew stronger as summer bloomed across the Colorado hills. Lillian found herself talking to the child, promising a life filled with love and security. And increasingly, when she imagined that life, Ethan was part of it, teaching the child to ride, reading stories by the firelight, providing the steady presence of a father. It was on a warm evening in late July, as they sat on the porch of their cabin watching the sunset paint the mountains in gold and purple, that Lillian finally gave Ethan her answer. "Yes," she said simply, her hand finding his where it rested on the arm of his chair. Ethan turned to her, his expression questioning. "Yes, I want our marriage to be real," Lillian clarified. "I want us to be a family, you, me, and the baby." The smile that spread across Ethan's face was like the sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice suddenly husky with emotion. "I've never been more sure of anything," Lillian replied. "You came into my life when I had lost all hope, when my own family had turned their backs on me. You gave me a chance at a new beginning, and along the way, I fell in love with you, Ethan Ryder." Ethan rose from his chair and knelt before her, taking both her hands in his. "I love you too, Lillian. Have since that first night in Oatman, though I was too stubborn to admit it even to myself." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. From it, he produced a delicate silver ring set with a small, perfect sapphire. "I got this in town last week," he explained. "Thought if you said yes, you deserved something more than my mother's old band, something that's just yours." Tears filled Lillian's eyes as he slipped the ring onto her finger alongside the gold band she had worn since leaving Oatman. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Not half as beautiful as you," Ethan replied, rising to his feet and drawing her up with him. His kiss was tender, full of promise for the future they would build together. The following Sunday, after services at the small church in the nearby town, Ethan and Lillian were properly married by the minister, with the Sullivans and the ranch hands as witnesses. It was a simple ceremony, but filled with genuine joy. Lillian wore a dress Martha had helped her make, pale blue to match her eyes and modified to accommodate her growing belly. Ethan wore his best shirt and a new vest, his boots polished to a shine. Their vows were heartfelt, spoken with the conviction of two people who had chosen each other not in the flush of youthful passion, but with the clear-eyed understanding of what it meant to build a life together. "I take you, Lillian, to be my wife," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "To stand by your side through whatever life brings, to honor and cherish you, to be a father to the child you carry, and to any others we might be blessed with. This I promise from this day forward." "I take you, Ethan, to be my husband," Lillian responded, her hand tight in his. "To build a home and a future with you, to support you in your dreams as you have supported me in mine, to love you faithfully for all the days of our lives. This I promise, with my whole heart." The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, a festive gathering that lasted well into the evening. As the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the yard, Ethan found Lillian sitting on a bench beneath an old oak tree, watching the dancing with a tired but contented smile. "Happy, Mrs. Ryder?" he asked, settling beside her. "Very," she assured him, leaning against his shoulder. "Though I think your son is getting restless." She guided his hand to her belly where the baby was kicking energetically. "My son, is it?" Ethan chuckled, feeling the strong movements beneath his palm. "And how are you so sure it's a boy?" "Just a feeling," Lillian replied with a smile. "But whether boy or girl, this child will be yours in all the ways that matter, Ethan." "Ours," he corrected gently. "Our child. The first of our family." The baby arrived 2 weeks later in the early hours of an August morning. It was a difficult birth, long and arduous, with Lillian's labor lasting from sunset to sunrise. Martha Sullivan stayed by her side throughout, offering comfort and encouragement, while Ethan paced anxiously outside, driven from the room by Martha's insistence that birthing was women's business. When the child finally made its entrance into the world, announcing its arrival with a lusty cry, Martha wrapped the infant in a soft blanket and placed it in Lillian's exhausted arms. "You have a son, my dear," she said, smiling at the new mother's wonder. "A strong, healthy boy." Tears streamed down Lillian's face as she gazed at her child, a tiny, red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair. "He's perfect," she whispered. "Shall I send your husband in to meet his son?" Martha asked, her eyes twinkling. Lillian nodded, too overcome with emotion to speak. Moments later, Ethan entered the room, his face drawn with worry until he saw Lillian smile. He moved to the bedside, his eyes fixed on the bundle in her arms. "We have a son," Lillian told him, her voice hoarse from her long labor. "Would you like to hold him?" With gentle reverence, Ethan took the infant from her, cradling him carefully against his chest. The baby blinked up at him with unfocused eyes, his tiny hand flexing against the blanket. "Hello, little one," Ethan murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your pa." The simple declaration brought fresh tears to Lillian's eyes. In that moment, watching the man she loved hold her child with such tenderness, the painful memories of Oatman began to fade. This was her family now, the family she had found against all odds, the family that had begun with a locked door and a stranger's kindness. "What shall we call him?" Ethan asked, returning the baby to Lillian's arms. She had thought about names during the long months of pregnancy, considering family names from both her side and Ethan's. But now, looking at her son's face, she knew what his name should be. "James," she said. "James Ethan Ryder. After Mr. Sullivan, who gave us our start here, and after you, who gave us a future." Ethan's smile was brilliant. "James Ethan Ryder," he repeated, stroking the baby's cheek with one gentle finger. "Welcome to the world, son. Welcome to our family." The years that followed brought changes and growth to the Ryder family. Ethan proved himself an exceptional foreman, eventually becoming a partner in the Circle S ranch when Sullivan decided to semi-retire. Lillian found her place in the ranching community, using her education to teach the children of ranch hands and neighboring homesteaders in a small school built on Circle S land. James grew into a sturdy boy with his mother's blue eyes and his father's quiet determination. He was joined 2 years after his birth by a sister, Emma, named for the aunt she would never meet but whose story had, in a roundabout way, brought her parents together. On the 5th anniversary of their arrival in Colorado, Ethan surprised Lillian with the deed to a parcel of land adjacent to the Circle S 100 acres of prime grazing land, with a small creek running through it. "Sullivan helped me arrange it," he explained as they stood on a hilltop overlooking their property. "We'll still be working with the Circle S, but this land is ours, for our children and their children after them." "Our own ranch," Lillian marveled, leaning against him as the wind played with her hair. "If someone had told me 6 years ago when I was sitting on that porch in Oatman." "Life takes unexpected turns," Ethan agreed, his arm tightening around her waist. "I was just passing through Oatman. Never meant to stay more than a night." "I'm glad you did," Lillian said softly. "Glad you stopped when you saw me there. Glad you picked that lock and led me away." "Best decision I ever made," Ethan replied, turning her to face him. His kiss was as tender as the first they had shared, but deepened by the years of love and partnership between them. "I love you, Lillian Ryder." "And I love you, Ethan Ryder," she whispered against his lips, more with each passing day. From the base of the hill, James's voice called up to them, full of a 7-year-old's impatience. "Pa, Ma, come see what Emma found." Hand in hand, they made their way down the hill to where their children waited, their faces bright with excitement over some new discovery. Lillian's heart swelled with gratitude for this life she had found for the family that had begun in the most unlikely of circumstances, for the love that had grown from compassion to partnership to the deep, abiding connection she shared with Ethan. The sun was setting over the Colorado mountains, painting the sky in the same brilliant colors she had witnessed on that first journey north. But now, instead of uncertainty and fear, Lillian felt only peace and joy. She had found her home, her family, her place in the world, all because a cowboy had passed through Oatman on a spring evening and stopped to help a girl in trouble. As their children ran ahead, chattering excitedly, Ethan squeezed Lillian's hand. "Happy?" he asked, as he often did. "Completely," she assured him. And it was true. The locked door of her past had led to an open future filled with love, laughter, and the enduring happiness of a family built not on obligation, but on choice, the choice to love, to trust, to build something lasting together. In the gathering dusk, the lights of their ranch house glowed warmly, beckoning them home. Together, the Ryders walked toward that light, toward the future they continued to create, with each passing day, a future that had begun when a family's rejection had given way to a stranger's compassion, when a locked door had opened onto a path leading to love.